I always thought the sound of a heartbeat was the most honest thing in the world. It's steady rhythmic and supposed to be the soundtrack to a long shared life. But standing here in the silence of my own living room, watching the woman I've loved for 12 years sleep peacefully on our Egyptian cotton sheets, I realized that some heartbeats are just metronomes for a countdown. My countdown. You ever get that feeling, that tiny icy prickle at the base of your spine that tells you the floor isn't as solid as you think it is? I'm Leland, and if you're listening to this from your car, your kitchen, or while you're lying in bed next to someone you trust, hold on to that trust. Because I'm about to tell you how I found out my wife, the woman who promised to grow old with me, had already started shopping for my casket. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below. Hey, I really need to feel like there are still people out there who value a promise. Because my world just turned into a high-stakes paper trail. We lived in a house that looked like a dream on a hilltop in the suburbs of Seattle. I'm a custom furniture maker. I spend my days working with oak, walnut, and cherry. I know how to find the flaws in a piece of wood, the hidden rot that can ruin a table if you don't cut it out. But I was blind to the rot in my own home, Odessa. My wife was a high-end real estate stager. She knew exactly how to make a cold, empty space look warm and inviting. She knew how to light a room so you couldn't see the cracks in the foundation. For years, I thought we were the it couple. We had the charity galas, the weekend trips to the coast, and a marriage that felt as sturdy as the timber frames I built. Then came the shift. It wasn't a scream or a fight. It was a whisper. It started with a sudden, almost obsessive interest in our long-term security. Odessa began bringing home brochures from insurance agencies, talking about the what-ifs of life with a frantic kind of energy that she masked as concern. She told me that with the economy being so volatile and my job being physically risky, we needed to be prepared. She wasn't just talking about a standard policy. She was talking about a massive 7-figure accidental death policy with a double indemnity clause. Leland, honey, she'd say, her fingers tracing the collar of my shirt as if she were measuring the width of my neck. I just couldn't live with myself if something happened to you on one of those job sites and I wasn't able to keep this house. We've worked too hard for this. I felt a surge of guilt back then. I thought I was being a selfish husband for being annoyed by the paperwork. I thought her anxiety was a reflection of how much she loved me. So I signed. I sat at our reclaimed wood dining table and inked my name onto the bottom of a document that valued my life at $5 million, but only if my death was sudden, violent, and accidental. I remember the way she tucked that folder under her arm. She didn't put it in the filing cabinet. She held it to her chest like it was a newborn child. A week later, I got a call that changed everything. It was Tristan. Tristan has been my best friend since we were kids, playing in the sawdust of my father's workshop. He's a senior underwriter for one of the biggest firms in the Pacific Northwest, the same firm Odessa had used. He called me from a burner phone, which was the first red flag. His voice was a low, jagged rasp. Leland, I'm breaking every professional code I have by making this call, he told me. But I saw your file on my supervisor's desk, and then I saw the inquiry logs. My heart hammered against my ribs. What are you talking about, Tris? It's just insurance. No, he whispered. It's the questions she's asking. She didn't call the general line. She called an old contact of hers in the claims department. She was asking very specific, very technical questions about the unwitnessed accident protocols for the mountain passes. She wanted to know exactly how much forensic evidence is required to trigger a payout if a vehicle goes over a cliffside where there's no cell service and no cameras. She wasn't asking how to protect you, Leland. She was asking how to get away with losing you. I stayed silent for what felt like an hour. The phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. The air in the room felt thick, like I was breathing in wood glue. I looked at the photos on the wall, us in Maui, us at my sister's wedding, and they looked like evidence from a cold case file. I wanted to tell Tristan he was crazy. I wanted to laugh it off. But deep down, that icy prickle at the base of your spine had turned into a full-blown frost. She asked about the North Cascade passes, Leland. Tristan continued, his voice trembling. She was specific about the hairpin turns near Mount Rainier. She's looking for a dead zone, a place where things disappear. When I hung up, I didn't move. I sat in my workshop, the smell of cedar heavy in the air, and looked at my tools. Chisels, saws, hammers. Things that are meant to build, but can so easily destroy. I realized that my marriage wasn't a partnership anymore. It was a crime scene in the making. Every I love you from her over the last month felt like a layer of plastic wrap being tightened over my face. I decided right then that I wouldn't run. If I ran, I'd always be looking over my shoulder. If I just divorced her, she'd take half of everything I'd built and find another way to ruin me. No, I needed to know the depth of the betrayal. I needed to see the monster behind the mask she wore every morning while she poured my coffee. Over the next few days, I became an actor in my own life. I played the doting, oblivious husband. I kissed her cheek before I went to work, ignoring the way her skin felt like cold marble. I watched her through the rearview mirror as I pulled out of the driveway, noticing for the first time that she didn't wave goodbye until she was sure I was looking. I started paying attention to the things I used to ignore, like the way she'd suddenly flip her phone face down when I walked into the kitchen, or the way she had started taking client calls in the garage late at night. One evening, I crept out to the mudroom, my socks muffling my footsteps on the hardwood. The garage door was heavy, but I left it cracked just a hair. I heard her voice. It wasn't the soft melodic tone she used with me. It was sharp, clipped, and urgent. "The policy is active," she said, her voice echoing slightly against the concrete walls. "Everything is in place, but we have to be smart about the timing. The weather report says there's a storm front moving in this Friday. The visibility will be near zero on the pass. It's the perfect cover for a mechanical failure." Then I heard a man's voice, a deep, gravelly laugh that I didn't recognize. "Don't worry, Odessa," the man said. "I've done this before. A few turns of a wrench on the steering rack and he won't even realize he's lost control until he's airborne. It'll look like he took the corner too fast in the rain. Tragic, simple, and very, very profitable." I leaned my forehead against the cold doorframe, my eyes stinging. She wasn't just planning a payout. She had an accomplice. She had a lover who was helping her engineer my execution. The betrayal wasn't a single strike. It was a slow, methodical dismantling of my entire existence. I went back to bed before she came inside, sliding under the covers and slowing my breathing to match the rhythm of someone in a deep sleep. When she finally climbed in next to me, I felt the bed shift. She reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that used to bring me peace. Now it felt like the touch of a spider checking its web. I lay there in the dark, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, realizing that the man I used to be, the one who believed in "until death do us part," was already dead. The next morning, the sun hit the valley with a cruel brightness. Odessa was already in the kitchen, humming a song as she flipped pancakes. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who didn't have a care in the world. "Leland, babe," she chirped, sliding a plate in front of me. I was thinking, since you've been working so hard on that walnut dining set, we should take the truck up to the cabin this Friday. Just a quick weekend getaway before the winter snow really hits. What do you think? I looked down at the pancakes, my stomach churning. She was setting the stage. Friday, the storm front, the mountain pass, the mechanical failure. "That sounds like exactly what I need," I'd said, my voice sounding hollow and strange in my own ears. I looked up and met her eyes, searching for even a flicker of hesitation, a grain of remorse. There was nothing. Just a clear blue emptiness that chilled me to the bone. "I'll make sure the truck is gassed up and ready to go," she said, leaning over to press a lingering kiss to my forehead. I watched her walk away, her silk robe fluttering behind her like a shroud. I didn't eat the food. Instead, I waited until I heard her shower start, and then I grabbed my keys and headed out to the garage. I needed to see it for myself. I crawled underneath the heavy frame of my Ford F-150, the cold concrete biting into my back. I pulled out a high-lumen flashlight and began to inspect the undercarriage, my heart throat deep as I traced the lines of the steering assembly. There, tucked away near the steering rack, I saw it. A series of fresh, bright scratches on the metal where a heavy-duty wrench had recently been applied. The bolts weren't just tight. They had been tampered with in a way that ensured they would vibrate loose under the stress of high-speed cornering. It was a masterpiece of lethal engineering. I stayed under that truck for a long time, the smell of grease and cold iron filling my lungs, my fingers trembling as I touched the very spot where my life was supposed to end. I rolled out from under the vehicle, my clothes stained with oil, and my face pale. I stood up in the middle of the silent garage, the morning light filtering through the small windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a hunter who had just found the tracks of his prey. I wiped the grease off my hands with a rag, my eyes fixed on the heavy wrench sitting on my workbench, the cold realization of what I had to do, settling over me like a heavy leaden cloak. The grease on my skin felt like a black mark of the death sentence my own wife had signed. I didn't wash it off immediately. Instead, I stood there in the echoing quiet of the garage, staring at that wrench until my vision blurred. The transition from a husband to a target is a violent, silent shift that tears your reality in half. Every floorboard in our house, every memory of our wedding day, every "I love you" whispered in the dark, it all suddenly felt like a lie designed to keep me docile while they sharpened the blade. I finally dragged myself back inside, scrubbing my hands until the skin was raw and red, but the feeling of being marked remained. I had to look at Odessa across the breakfast nook, watching her sip her herbal tea with the grace of a saint while my mind was screaming. Have you ever had to act like everything was fine while knowing the person you're with is counting down the minutes until you're a memory? It's a special kind of hell. I'm Leland, and this is where the investigation into my own murder truly began. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. In the state of Washington, an accidental death is a gold mine, but a failed attempt is just a divorce case unless you have ironclad proof of intent. I needed more than just a loose bolt and a conversation overheard through a garage door. I needed to see the face of the man who thought he could steal my life and my legacy. The following night, I told Odessa I had to stay late at the shop to finish a mahogany desk for a client in Bellevue. It was the perfect excuse. Instead of going to the shop, I drove my old work van, the one she never tracks, to a quiet spot 3 blocks away from our house. I sat in the shadows, the cabin of the van smelling of old coffee and sawdust, and I waited. Around 11:30 p.m., I saw it. A dark, beat-up muscle car with a rumbling engine pulled into the cul-de-sac. It didn't park in our driveway. It slid into the darkness under a large oak tree across the street. A man stepped out. He was tall, built like a brick wall, with a heavy, swaggering gait that oozed a predatory kind of confidence. Even from the distance, I could see the tattoos snaking up his neck. This was Rocco. My hand gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought the plastic would snap. I watched through my binoculars as Odessa opened the side door. She didn't look scared. She didn't look hesitant. She ran into his arms with a desperation I haven't seen in years. They didn't even go inside. They stayed in the shadows of the porch, their silhouettes merging into one. I could hear the muffled sound of their laughter, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the night air like a razor. "He's so clueless, Rocco," I caught her saying, as the wind shifted the sound toward me. "He actually thanked me for the insurance policy. He thinks I'm protecting him." Rocco's voice was a low, guttural growl that made my skin crawl. "He won't be thinking anything once he's at the bottom of that ravine. The bolts are ready. One sharp turn at 50 miles an hour and the steering will just vanish. He'll go over the edge before he can even hit the brakes." I felt a wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to lean my head against the window. They weren't just killing me for the money, they were laughing at my trust. They were mocking the very foundation of the man I had tried to be for her. Every piece of furniture I had built to pay for her jewelry, every late night I spent sweating in the shop to keep her in silk, it was all just fuel for their fire. I spent the next 48 hours living a double life. By day, I was the doting husband, even taking Odessa out for an early anniversary dinner, where I had to watch her smile at me over a glass of expensive Cabernet. By night, I was a ghost. I installed a tiny pinhole camera in the garage hidden inside an old smoke detector I deactivated. I also tucked a high-gain microphone behind the workbench where they liked to meet. I needed the blueprint of murder recorded. I needed the jury to hear the coldness in her voice. On Thursday night, the final piece of the betrayal fell into place. I sat in my van, parked at a nearby park with my laptop open, listening to the live feed from the garage. The audio was crisp. I heard the clinking of tools. Rocco was back doing a final check on his handiwork. "Make sure it doesn't fail, Rocco." Odessa's voice came through the speakers, devoid of any warmth. "I can't have him walking away from this with a broken leg and a suspicious mind. It has to be total. The car has to be unrecognizable." "Don't worry, baby," Rocco replied. "Between the steering rack and the brake fluid leak I just started, that truck is a rolling coffin. He'll be lucky if they find enough of him to bury." I closed the laptop slowly, the blue light fading from my face. The pain I'd felt days ago had finally burned away, leaving nothing but a cold, hard diamond of resolve. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was an architect of a different kind of structure, a trap. I reached out to Tristan one last time. We met at a crowded diner where the clatter of plates drowned out our conversation. I showed him the footage and played him the audio. His face went gray. "Leland, you can't get in that truck," he whispered, his hands shaking as he held his coffee mug. "Hey, call the police now. This is enough." "No," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from someone else. "If I call them now, they'll get a few years for conspiracy. She'll be out in 5 coming after me again. I need them to think they've won. I need them to show their hand at the scene of the crime." Tristan looked at me with a mix of fear and respect. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give them the accident they want," I replied, "but I'm not going to be the one in the driver's seat." I spent the rest of that night in my workshop, not building furniture, but preparing. I had an old identical model of my truck, a parts vehicle I'd kept in storage for years. It was rusted and didn't run, but from a distance, in a storm, it was a twin to my daily driver. I spent hours swapping the license plates and moving my personal belongings, my favorite cap, my sunglasses, my work bag into the decoy. By the time the first gray streaks of Friday morning began to bleed through the clouds, I was finished. The air was heavy, the barometer dropping just like the weather report had predicted. The storm was coming. I walked back into the house, my boots heavy on the porch. Odessa was already up wearing her favorite cashmere sweater, her hair perfectly styled for a woman about to become a grieving widow. She had a thermos of coffee ready for me. "Ready for our getaway, honey?" she asked, her voice sweet enough to rot teeth. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see the woman I married. I saw a predator waiting for the kill. I took the thermos from her hand, my fingers briefly brushing against hers. Her hand was warm, but mine was like ice. I turned away without a word, walking toward the garage where the rolling coffin sat waiting my shadow, stretching long and jagged across the kitchen floor. The weight of the thermos in my hand felt like a leaden anchor, pulling me toward a floor that no longer existed. I didn't look back as I walked through the mudroom, but I could feel Odessa's eyes boring into the center of my shoulder blades, a silent, predatory gaze that was already imagining me as a ghost. The garage door creaked open with a groan that sounded like a warning, revealing the truck bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the overhead lights. It looked the same as it had for years, but now every curve of the metal and every bolt in the frame felt like a component of a lethal machine. I set the coffee on the workbench and climbed into the driver's seat. The leather was cold. The air inside the cabin was stale, smelling faintly of the pine air freshener Odessa had insisted on putting there a week ago, probably to cover the scent of the betrayal she was cooking up. I gripped the steering wheel, and for a split second, I imagined the sensation of it going limp in my hands. The terrifying moment when the connection between my will and the tires would be severed by Rocco's handiwork. But I wasn't leaving in this truck. Not today. Under the cover of the gathering storm clouds, I had already executed the most dangerous swap of my life. The decoy truck, the rusted twin I'd spent all night prepping, was already positioned in the secluded service alley behind my workshop, just 10 miles up the mountain road. I had used a flatbed trailer, borrowed from a contact, who didn't ask questions, to move it there under the veil of midnight. Now I just had to get myself to that point, without Odessa or Rocco, realizing I had veered off their carefully planned script. "Leland, are you okay in there?" Odessa's voice drifted from the kitchen door, tinged with a forced sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Just checking the tire pressure," I called back, my voice steady, hardened by the absolute lack of emotion I felt for her. I'll be out in a second." I started the engine. It roared to life, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that usually brought me pride, but now it sounded like a funeral dirge. I backed out of the driveway, seeing her standing on the porch, wrapped in her cashmere, waving a dainty hand. It was a picture-perfect scene of a suburban wife saying goodbye to her husband. I didn't wave back. I just shifted into drive and let the rain, which had finally begun to fall in heavy, jagged sheets, wash her image from my side mirror. The drive up the mountain was a test of nerves I wasn't sure I could pass. Every time I hit a pothole or took a slight curve, my mind flashed to the tampered steering rack. I drove like a man on an ice rink, my hands barely touching the wheel, my eyes scanning every inch of the road for the dark muscle car. I knew Rocco would be driving to tail me. He'd want to be there. He'd want to see the impact. He'd want to be the first one to call Odessa and tell her the job was done. As I approached the turnoff for my workshop, the fog began to roll in thick gray blankets of mist that swallowed the pines and turned the world into a monochromatic nightmare. This was the cover they had talked about, the perfect environment for a tragedy. I pulled into the service alley, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I worked fast. I abandoned my good truck in the deep shadows of the workshop's loading bay, covering it with a heavy canvas tarp. I then moved to the decoy. I had rigged it with a remote ignition system and a heavy weight on the gas pedal that I could trigger from a distance. It was crude, but in this visibility, it wouldn't matter. I dressed a mannequin in my old work jacket and a baseball cap, strapping it into the driver's seat. To anyone watching from 50 feet away in a torrential downpour, it was me. I looked at my watch. 10:45 a.m. The time we usually hit the mountain pass. I retreated to a rocky outcropping overlooking the dead zone, the specific hairpin turn Tristan had mentioned. I was soaked to the bone, the rain chilling my blood, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt a strange electric clarity. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Tristan had given me, a direct line to a contact in the state patrol, who was already briefed on the suspicious activity involving the insurance claim. "I'm in position," I whispered into the receiver. "The vehicle is moving." I triggered the decoy. The rusted engine coughed and sputtered, then caught. The truck began to roll forward, picking up speed as it headed toward the main road. I watched it from my perch, a ghost watching its own funeral procession. And then I saw it, the dark muscle car. It pulled out from a side road, its headlights dimmed, trailing the decoy truck like a shark following a trail of blood. Rocco was there. The decoy truck hit the main road and began the ascent toward the hairpin. The wind was howling now, tearing at the trees, creating a chaotic symphony of cracking branches and rushing water. As the truck approached the edge of the ravine, I saw the dark car accelerate. Rocco wanted a front row seat. I didn't watch the crash. I couldn't. Instead, I closed my eyes and listened. The sound was unmistakable. The screech of metal on metal, the roar of an engine being pushed to its limit, and then a sickening hollow silence, followed by a distant echoing thud that vibrated through the very rock I was standing on. My stomach turned. Even though I knew it was just a shell of a car and a pile of old clothes, the finality of the sound hit me. That was supposed to be me. That was the sound of my life ending in the eyes of the law, the insurance company, and the woman I called my wife. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then I saw a flash of light from the road below. A phone. Someone was taking a picture. Someone was confirming the kill. I pulled out my own phone. My hands were finally shaking, a delayed reaction to the sheer insanity of the last hour. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Tristan. I scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. Odessa. I hit dial. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Her voice was breathless panic, but with a hidden edge of excitement she couldn't quite mask. Leland, is that you? Oh my God, I've been calling and calling. There was a report on the radio about an accident on the pass. Honey, please tell me you're okay. The sheer brilliance of her acting almost made me applaud. She sounded like a woman on the verge of a breakdown, the perfect grieving widow-to-be. Odessa, I said, my voice low and rasping, sounding exactly like a man who had just crawled out of a wreck. I'm at the pass. The steering. It just went. I don't know what happened. Everything happened so fast. Leland, stay there, don't move. I'm coming to get you. Where are you? I'm by the big oak, the one near the cliffside. I lied, naming a spot about 100 yards away from the actual crash site. Everything is dark, Odessa. I can't see anything. I think I'm hurt bad. Please. Tell me you're coming. I'm on my way, baby. I'm leaving right now. Just hold on for me. She hung up. I could almost hear her tossing the phone onto the passenger seat of her SUV, her heart racing, not with fear, but with the thrill of the payout. She'd be calling Rocco next. She'd be telling him to get out of there, that the victim was still breathing, and they needed to finish the scene. I climbed down from the rocks, my boots splashing in the mud. I didn't go toward the road. I went toward the darkness of the trees, circling back toward the crash site from the opposite direction. I wanted to see her face when she realized the ghost she was looking for wasn't under the wreckage. The rain continued to pour, a relentless deluge that seemed to be trying to wash away the sins of the mountain. I reached the edge of the clearing, hidden by a thicket of hemlock. Below me, the decoy truck lay in a crumpled heap, smoke rising from the mangled hood despite the rain. A set of headlights cut through the fog. A white SUV, her car pulled to a screeching halt at the edge of the road. The door flung open, and Odessa stepped out. She wasn't wearing her mourning face yet. She was looking at the wreckage with a focused, analytical intensity. She walked toward the edge of the ravine, her heels sinking into the soft earth, her eyes searching the depths for the body she expected to see. Behind her, the dark muscle car pulled up. Rocco stepped out, a crowbar in his hand, his face twisted into a smirk of victory. They stood there together at the edge of the abyss, 2 silhouettes framed against the gray void of the storm. I stood in the shadows, my lungs burning with the cold air, my finger hovering over the record button on my camera. I watched them lean in close to each other, their voices lost to the wind, but their body language telling the whole story. They weren't looking for a survivor. They were looking for a confirmation. Odessa turned her head, looking toward the big oak tree I had mentioned. Her expression shifted from triumph to a flicker of confusion. She took a step toward the darkness, her hand shielding her eyes from the rain, trying to pierce the veil of the fog to find the man who shouldn't be alive to speak. I took a deep breath, the scent of wet earth and burnt rubber filling my senses, and stepped out from behind the hemlock tree, the light of my flashlight, cutting a sharp white line through the mist, and landing directly on her terrified upturned face. The beam of my flashlight hit Odessa's eyes, and the world seemed to stop spinning. The color drained from her face so fast it was like watching a ghost manifest in real time. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out my name in relief. Her jaw simply hung slack, her breath hitching in a throat that had just been ready to mourn me for a $5 million check. Beside her, Rocco froze his fingers, tightening around the cold steel of the crowbar, his predatory smirk curdling into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Odessa," I said, my voice cutting through the roar of the mountain rain with a surgical precision I didn't know I possessed. Or maybe you're just disappointed that the mechanical failure didn't take. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, the mud squelching beneath my boots. I wasn't the broken man she expected to find crawling out of a ravine. I was the architect of her undoing. I have to stop here for a second and ask you guys, what would you do if you were standing there? Some people tell me I should have just let the police handle it from the start, that confronting them in the dark was a death wish, but others say they'd want to see the light leave their eyes the moment they realized the game was over. I want to know your take. Was I being brave, or was I being just as twisted as them for wanting to watch them squirm? Drop a vengeance or justice in the comments right now. I'm reading every single one. Leland, honey, I thought you were in the car. She stammered, her voice trembling as she tried to reconstruct her mask. She took a tentative step toward me, her hands reaching out as if to touch me to see if I was solid. "I saw the wreck. I thought I lost you. I was coming to save you." "Stop," I commanded, and the word hit her like a physical blow. The acting was top-tier Odessa, really. The thermos, the kiss, the panicked phone call, it was almost worth $5 million. But the microphones in the garage, they were a lot more honest than you. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen glowing bright against the gloom. I hit play. The mountain air was suddenly filled with the recording of her own voice from the night before, sharp and calculating, discussing the dead zone and the rolling coffin. Rocco moved then. He wasn't a man of words. He was a man of violence. He swung the crowbar in a wide, desperate arc, aiming for my head. But I wasn't alone on that mountain. Blue and red lights exploded from the tree line behind me, slicing through the fog like jagged neon knives. The high-pitched wail of a siren drowned out the wind. "Drop the weapon, hands in the air, now." The commands came from state patrol officers who had been crouched in the brush recording every second of the confrontation. Rocco dropped the steel bar. It thudded into the mud, a pathetic sound for a man who thought he was a hitman. Odessa collapsed to her knees, her expensive cashmere soaking up the filth of the roadside. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying because the life she had staged, the house, the jewelry, the freedom, was vanishing into the back of a squad car. I stood there as the officers moved in, clicking handcuffs onto their wrists. Tristan stepped out from behind one of the cruisers, his face pale, but his eyes steady. He walked over to me and put a hand on my shoulder. We didn't say anything. We just watched as the woman I had spent a decade loving was pushed into the back seat of a police vehicle, her eyes finally meeting mine through the glass. There was no love left in them, only a simmering, toxic hatred. In the weeks that followed, the story became a local sensation. The insurance widow and her grease monkey lover. The evidence was overwhelming, the recordings, the tampered steering rack, and the financial trail Tristan had helped me uncover. They were both sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. But here is where the internet really divided on my story. When the news broke, half the comments were cheering for me, saying I handled it like a boss. But the other half, they called me cold. They said that by setting up a decoy and playing with her emotions at the crash site, I was just as manipulative as she was. They argued that I should have just walked away and let the law work without the drama. What do you think? Did I go too far by making her think I was dying on the phone? Or did she deserve to feel every second of that terror? I've seen threads on Reddit debating this for months. Some people think I'm a hero. Others think I'm a sociopath who just happened to be the victim. I really want to hear your side. Let's start a debate in the comments. I'm curious to see which side you land on. As for me, I didn't take a cent of that policy. I canceled it the day after the arrests. I sold the Hilltop house and the custom furniture shop. Everything that reminded me of her had to go. You can't build something new on a foundation of rot. I took what was left of my savings and bought a small cabin in the woods of Montana, far away from mountain passes and deceptive smiles. I spend my days working with wood again, but I'm different now. I don't just look for the flaws in the grain. I appreciate the scars. They make the wood stronger. They give it character. I realized that the most dangerous person in my life wasn't the man with the crowbar. It was the woman who knew my favorite coffee and how I liked my pillows, because she was the only one who could get close enough to find my heart and decide it was worth less than a piece of paper. I sat on my new porch this morning, watching the sun rise over a horizon that finally felt clean. I realized that while she tried to engineer my death, she accidentally gave me a second life. I'm Leland, and I'm finally driving my own road. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I hope it reminds you to look a little closer at the people you let into your circle. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Next time I'll tell you about the letter she sent me from prison and the shocking reason why I finally decided to read it. Stay safe out there, and remember, trust your gut, because it's the only thing that doesn't have a motive. I picked up my carving knife, the blade catching the morning light, and made the first cut into a fresh piece of cedar.